Hello, everybody. Welcome to Shmoo. Emilia. And this is the regular note well. You're probably far enough in the week to recognize what's in there. But by participating in this meeting, you agree to follow the BCPs that are pertinent to this, like as what defines a contribution and so on. Please look at the links in the slide to read like more details about that. Thank you. And we are looking for a minute taker, so if somebody can volunteer to take the minutes, they're just like, just decision points and so on would be interesting. There's not much on the agenda today. So if you can type in the chat box if you're willing to take minutes. If not, I can take some high-level notes, but if you're willing, please. Thanks, Brown. Always save the day. Thank you. And it's really early for you or in the day, so thank you very much. So just looking at the deliverables and status. So for the remote meetings, the guidelines for the principles for canceling a physical meeting and replacing it with a fully online meeting. So the draft, like IETF Shmoo remote meetings, has completed the IESG eval, and it has been approved, but pending a revised ID. So Martin, is there anything you want to talk about it, like on the pending edits?
No, it was all pretty minor stuff. If people are interested, the editor's draft is on the GitHub, and I think probably by the end of this week, the final version will be posted. Go to RFC's queue. Perfect. Thank you. Thanks, Martin. And for the meeting fees draft, the remote fee draft has also been ready. Like, we kind of didn't get the emails from the authors due to like some Gmail issues. But the draft is ready for working group last call. So we kind of realized like the author's mails are not getting through to some of us. And that's something we would initiate right after this meeting to send to working group last call and then send it along the process right after that. And the hackathon draft was adopted as a working group item. And I would say it's like in fairly good shape, but like, so whenever the author like lets us know it's ready for working group last call, we'll just ship it off as well. I think it's like fairly in good shape unless there's some updates from this meeting's hackathon. That should be ready to go as well. And there's another draft which kind of is like fairly new. This is like the Miria and Martin's online meeting draft. That's something that's going to be presented today about like how the scheduling and stuff works for the meetings. And we can discuss like the draft and see if it fits the purpose for like a deliverable for this. And there are other drafts that have been used before, like there's like Michael's draft, the many fine dinners draft, and Mallory's draft. They've expired. So I think Michael, if you have plans to update it and bring it back, like please do so. Like we would really look forward to that as well. And again, on the technology side as well, there was really only one draft, the hum draft or show of hands draft, like that Martin did, and that has also expired. So there's really no drafts targeting the deliverables right now. And so we have like two presentations today. One of them is really about the online meetings draft that we talked about earlier. I think it's going to be Martin who's going to be presenting it. And it's by Martin and Miria that they're going to go first. And then Jay would like to present the results of the on-site participation at IETF 112 survey. And there was a URL that was sent out. I also put it in the agenda. So if you want to click through and look at it, it's pretty much like an interactive dashboard of the results. So you can follow along either like what Jay is showing, or you can just look at it at your own leisure to figure your own conclusions from there. So that's something we want to discuss and see if there's something that comes out of it.
And probably at the end, like hand off to Lars to see if he has any other announcements to make here. So any questions about the agenda bashing? Go ahead, Martin.
You mentioned the show of hands draft. The sentiment I received was to not bother to ever take that to publication. That's why it hasn't been updated. If people want to adopt that, I can resurrect it. I just didn't sense a lot of enthusiasm to carry that all the way through. I mean, it is charter, doesn't mean we have to do it, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like it's one of the things I wanted to talk about in the next step, right? So like we are at this point where we do have a bunch of missing pieces. So either we kind of keep soliciting drafts or drop deliverables. That's a discussion we need to have with our AD. And after that, like either recharter or close, right? Like I think one of the things that came up in discussions of this hybrid meeting stuff, right? Like we're not chartered to do it. And so we'll wait for Lars's guidance to go forward. So like I think the idea at this point is to use the mailing list for discussions with like no indications regarding whether it's suitable for work here or not. Lars, did you want to make a point here or like leave it till the end?
Hi, no, I can say something. So yeah, I mentioned this earlier in Gen Dispatch. So I think we're gonna use the many couches list as the list to have the discussion for things people wanna talk about related to hybrid meetings. And if we recharter Shmoo and if we recharter it in a way that would let you work on this, it becomes part of the charter. But I asked that you chair sort of manage that discussion on this list. And people can obviously post individual drafts, and I think personally that would be helpful to sort of get a bit more understanding of what the different proposals are when it comes to hybrid meetings. But obviously they can't be adopted, but especially sort of to help drive the discussion on this, it would be helpful to see some things that have worked out a bit better than a few sentences in an email. But that's
perfect.
Just me personally.
Thanks, Lars. Ilya, go ahead.
Yeah, just one personal thought. So it is not the case as it was when we switched to online meetings that we had to make quick decisions and we didn't know what to come, right? So that was a different situation. However, I think we were not able, would have not been able to like write these drafts without the experience that we had over the last year and a little bit more. So for me, sure, we can discuss many aspects of hybrid meetings, but to actually do some chartered work, I think we need some experiences and then figure out what the right thing to do. So it might be a little too premature to actually talk about rechartering at this point.
Okay, thanks, Maria. Martin, did you want me to drive the slides or did you want to share?
You go ahead. It's fine if you did it. There aren't that many, but it looks like Torless is already in the queue.
Oh, sorry. No, sorry.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Just one point with respect to the whole logistics stuff, right? I think for the existing charter as well as for possible discussions beyond that, right? I think one of the issues is a little bit that a lot of the relevant data about which to make decisions is kind of scattered around other parts in the IETF, like leadership decisions and meeting committee decisions. So it's kind of just a food for thought if and how that could be made sure to be channeled accordingly into Shmoo and many couches, so that people can use this as a central point to know where to find all the other information. Some of it is CC'd when people do announcement into many couches, but I don't think that's universally true. So just as a question mark to the chairs, if they can think of things. Thanks.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, Torless. And I think like some of the questions, at least like that were on my mind, is like covered by the survey that Jay is going to present. And like I think it makes sense to start collecting this somewhere. Maybe we can set up a wiki where we can start putting in the things and links and so on. Like kind of like a design team, for lack of a better term. Yeah.
Can I quickly sort of ask Charles what kind of information you think you'd want? And maybe that would be the first thing to put on the wiki, right? Because there obviously information exists, especially on the side of Secretariat, right? but it's kind of hard to like make it available that we don't know what might be useful to the community.
Well, I think it starts with, you know, decisions that may have already been made or are in process of being discussed outside of Shmoo by the appropriate leadership teams, right? So just knowing where else to maybe start looking into to, you know, have knowledge to bring back, you know, ideas into.
What do you mean decisions that are already been made? I'm sort of, I mean, I want to help you get the information you need to participate in discussion, but I don't know what you're asking for.
Yeah, I think so. For example, these questionnaires, right? So I think they're really very good input, right? You know, they're presented here now, so that is great, right? If in 1 or 2 months you go back later, I mean, you find them just on the mailing list, right? So you can go through a long mailing list with many discussions, right? I think the wiki idea was good, and I think once we have something like that, it's a lot easier for people to contribute what they feel is relevant data for upcoming discussions.
Thanks, Tolas. Ready to go in, Martin, whenever you are.
All right, wonderful. Yeah, so Mira wrote this draft a few weeks ago to kind of capture some of the lessons learned over the past year in terms of how to run an online meeting, backed up by survey data. Next slide. And for most of the stuff, I mean, people, I don't think anyone who's attended any of these meetings would be surprised. It pretty much writes down what we've hit upon as like the least bad option in terms of the length of the sessions and how much of a break and tracks and whether we have a 107 style, you know, just boss and new working groups versus trying to have all the regular sessions that we would have in an in-person meeting. The one thing that required a little bit of deviation from that is selecting the actual times that the meeting should run. As you know, as everyone knows, I think we're currently using roughly noon to 1800 in the local time zone. It's by no means clear that the next online meeting or a future online meeting will have a sort of designated venue that is canceled. So that doesn't necessarily work. And certainly on the list, there's been a lot of angst about the 1200 selection, the noon start time in particular. I'm not particularly exercised about it, but nevertheless, that's something we had to put some thought into. Next slide. So what is in the draft today is what you see there. So there's sort of an Asia slot, a Europe slot, a North America slot, and while that excludes a number of important continents, you know, the IETF 111 method is, you know, meant to have to cite meetings in each of those places. So I think those are sort of recognized by consensus as the areas we should optimize for. So this was Mira sort of, Mira came up with these times, and it was sort of an effort to minimize the pain by some metric, and I'll get into that later. And I guess my main contribution to the document is to try to have a more systematic approach to figuring out how to slot these. Next slide. So I did a little scoring system here, and you can see what it is. It's kind of just measuring the pain, with 0.1 to 0.5 being the worst. I think most of us would agree with that. And then sort of shoulders that are somewhat less painful. Now, you know, this methodology is somewhat arbitrary, and I think we could certainly bike shed over how this was scored out. But so I try to figure out the score for each of 3 regions. Europe, I just use CET because it's pretty much plus or minus 1 from that. North America, I did a mean of Eastern Pacific. And for Asia, I did just a simple mean of the pain scores for those 4 time zones, which I think, I mean, Asia is pretty big, I've heard. And so that's just some effort to capture a little bit of the range involved there. Next slide. Okay, so by applying this methodology and just assuming that we just did 8-hour shifts for each rotation, and seeking that we're trying to sort of minimize the max pain. By this metric, if you look at the 4 left columns, picking 0, 2, 10, and 1800 hours are kind of have the lowest max pain of all the groups. An alternate methodology that Torla suggested just simply counts the hours between 0, 1 and 0, 5. And if you apply it that way, actually happily it comes out to being the same number. So that was pretty informative. Next slide. So if we were to pick that, this 2, 10, 18 allotment, this is how it comes out in the northern summer and northern winter. So it's a bit of an eye chart, but if you have a big enough monitor, you can probably see how this affects you personally. I haven't actually written a program just because of all possible permutations of start time yet, but I did kind of manually deviate a little bit because the 8-8-8 rule in terms of separating slots is not set in stone. And so I did try some deviation, try to fix particular problems and eliminate, move away from some local maxima, and it honestly wasn't successful. By these metrics, I didn't get any better than just sticking with 2, 10, 18. Next slide. Now, so what I just described to you is probably the most obvious way to try to do the scoring, and we can argue about the details and what time zones to include and whatnot. But you know, sort of this pain score thing is sort of an obvious thing. But I should say that this is not actually what Mira was trying to do with her original time zone selection. Her metric was not to sort of have this total pain index be minimized, but to make it so that only one meeting per year was truly awful for any of these time zones. So after a little bit of thought, I thought, well, what if we look at sort of the second worst meeting any given time zone, took that as the sort of the metric of interest here. So in other words, the median. So of the 3 meetings, the median for each time zone, and then the mean across all the different regions and between summer and winter. Next slide. So that comes out with a completely different number. And actually, oh gosh, there's a lot of bold here that shouldn't be in here. But actually, the best 8-hour differential I got was 6:14:22, and I actually, by sort of modifying it slightly to 5:14:22, I kind of minimized the max pain. And this is the score by that scoring system I showed you with the different hours of the second worst meeting for any given time zone. So you know, you're looking at in that meeting like about 1.5 hours of lousy times in that second worst meeting. And of course, the best meeting is generally free of these sorts of problems. Although Asia is big, as I said, for those of you who didn't know, and so it's very hard to make the Asia time zone work really well for everybody. So this is actually not exactly Mira's original proposal, but it's pretty close to it. So you know, I don't have a super strong opinion about how. Oh, I'm sorry. Next slide. So you can also see how this affects you. If we were to do that 5:14:22 split, this is kind of how it looks. Now, I'm not particularly wedded to either of these methodologies. I don't know how productive it is to go really deep into the methodology in terms of picking time zones or anything. But if anyone has any thoughts about what the correct metric is, or if there's serious methodological problems, what we think I've done here, this would be a wonderful time to share those thoughts. Mira.
Yeah, I would like to add one more point. I think like one of the big questions would really be looking at these two metrics is what do people want to optimize for in this high level, right? Do you rather want to optimize to have like one really good meeting for your time zone or only one really bad meeting for your time zone? If that's something you get guidance on, I think we're already a big step forward.
Pros.
Am I up? Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, and I think the up level that. So thank you very much for all that cool analysis, right? So and I think the problem really is maybe to start from the up level, and I think the main issue that we ran into is that my understanding for the reason of keeping the 8 schedule is that at this point in time we're not clear whether we want to make life harder for fewer people, because as soon as we do statistics against the number of people in a time zone, will end up with people in a time zone that's very sparsely populated with IETF participants to get the worst end of a stick, whereas it would be better for the majority. And I think we're seeing this right now, where I think the New Zealand people are fairly happy, and the Europeans, which outnumber them by a factor of 20 or so, are fairly unhappy. And so I think that's one of the big questions, right? What is the fairness metric we really want?
Yeah, I mean, it is always. I mean, certainly, like with the one extreme of trying to have every meeting optimized for most people, you just end up with everything optimized for the Atlantic, and people on the other side of the world perpetually disadvantaged. And conversely, if you just kind of make it completely neutral to where the people really are, you get some also pretty perverse results. So I think what we try to do is really just treat the 3 regions in the 1-1-1 logic, a 1-1-1 principle, as being equal, and going from there. Mark.
Okay. How many buttons do I have to click? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Somebody really needs to fix that. I think sharing the pain is the right approach here. I can see the logic for adapting the time zone in a very fine-grained way to make sure that you have participants who are active in the work, not disadvantaged on an ad hoc basis. But in the long term, we're supposed to be representing the whole internet. We're supposed to be a standards body for the whole world. And if we start biasing things towards certain geographies, then we have every expectation of having folks saying, well, that's not legitimate because it's obviously just biased towards North America or Europe or wherever it happens to be biased towards. So I think rotating the pain is absolutely the right approach here. Regarding the methodology here, I would just, you asked if we can accept this as kind of the basis for moving forward or something along those lines. I feel like there are so many assumptions baked into this, and I really need to unpick those and figure that out before I can have a rational answer to that. Because we're talking about meetings right now that are 4 to 6 hours long, and so that alone introduces a lot of variance into whether this is painful or not for people. You can't just treat them as a single point in time. And it also bakes in the assumption that having all of our meetings lumped into 1 week is the right solution. And I know that there's been discussion of that in the past, but I think we need to continuously evaluate what the right way to get the work done and to meet our goals is holistically, not just, well, let's take what we've always done in physical meetings and try and lump them online.
So yeah, I mean, I don't. Thank you for those comments, Mark. Like in terms of the length of the meeting, that is, I would put that definitely in the category of kind of the first slide where, I don't have the chapter and verse on this, but I believe the survey results were pretty positive about that particular aspect as opposed to some of the alternatives. But yeah, but regarding these times, yes, I do. Thanks for the comments, Charles. Mark, did you have more? Oh, yeah, sorry, Mira, go ahead.
So as you've seen on the first slide, the draft talks about all these aspects, but it's mainly making recommendations based on what we have experience on and what the survey seems to indicate. However, the draft also says, we should keep experimenting with all of this, and in the best case, one of the things at a time, so we actually know if it's better or worse. However, hopefully we will not have too many of these online-only meetings anymore, so the time and space for experimentation is also limited.
I should also add that there's a GitHub for this document on Mira's personal GitHub, and there's an issue specifically about this time zone thing that I need to update with this other scoring system. But So yeah, I'm throwing a lot at you to evaluate in real time, but there's an actual place for reasoned discussion on this.
Okay, I just don't.
On the
I
time
want to
zone
make sure we
issue.
don't just say, "Oh, we're making a decision. Let's move on." It sounds like we need to talk about it more.
No, you have to accept it now.
Yeah. I'd really caution about taking the surveys at face value because they're naturally going to be biased towards people who are very active in the IETF. And especially if this is a long-term kind of thing, which that's kind of what we're in now, you need to consider people who are more casually involved in the IETF and their needs.
I mean, surveys were like one input. The other input was like, how much complaints did we see about what we did in the last couple of meetings, and that decreased over the last year. So maybe some of these things are actually right, but don't know.
Or they've all quit in rage. Charles. You are muted, I believe. We cannot hear you. Ted. Charles, if you figure it out, we'll let you back in. Ted.
Howdy. The funny thing is I could actually read Charles's lips pretty well, which was kind of entertaining. You can't hear me? The cry of all of us. So I've used systems like this in the past, and I found that they work pretty well if you have a known set of participants. Like I was running the RSS GWG. We wanted to be able to figure out a time zone, even though we had people from Australia and people from Finland. That would actually work for them, and we basically ran an algorithm very close to this. The nice thing, though, is as you have a known set of people, you can take into account what pain actually means for those people. So there were some of those people for whom staying up was actually not a big deal. There were some of those people for whom getting up early was actually not a big deal because of other work that they did or how their systems work. As we move into this being a kind of a much more common thing, I think we really have to take a hard look at what the pain looks like when it's not just sleep. I mean, there are people for whom getting up in the morning and taking care of their kids before they go to school means that no matter what time you put the IETF, their day starts at that time of day. If they're staying home, that's going to be part of their reality. That wouldn't be part of their reality if they were traveling somewhere, maybe bringing the kids with them, maybe not. And I think we really have to take a much bigger look at this if we're going to make this the common case. And I agree with Ecker's comments in chat that means that trying to shove it all in 1 week may not be practical as a realistic perspective. And I also think that we have historically not really taken into account what we need to do on a diversity and inclusion perspective for early career professionals who may have very many other both family life and external responsibilities. And I think what that ends up meaning for me is we have to come back and ask ourselves, okay, if we're spreading the pain, what does the pain mean? And does that actually get better if we change it from 1 week to 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and it becomes something where there are a few occasions during that 3 week spread or 2 week spread where we get the real avoidance of pain for much larger groups of people and can put things like BOFs and plenaries and very large cross-pollination events into those close to zero pain common time zones. And where the ones that do have that, I agree, you share the pain as best you can. But I really think that this needs to up level to what the pain is and what the solution space looks like before we could say that share the pain as a principle solves the problem. I don't actually think it does. Thanks.
Thanks, Ted. Two responses to that. Number one, so between that and Mark, I think we do need to have at least a thread, an actual discussion thread about 1 week versus 2 weeks as a format, or whatever else people are proposing. But I would like to sort of violently agree with your statement that pain differs for different people. And I mean, the scoring system specifically counts 0 to, or rather 2200 to 0800 is kind of the pain region, because I think there are some people that have to go to work and do their day jobs, then do this in the evening, or conversely want to do it during their day work schedule and have the evenings free, and like we're really not trying to judge that. Just when people get really degraded from, you know, being up at 3 a.m, that is almost the universal sentiment, I would think. And so the scoring system tries to sort of weigh that. But thank you, Ted. Ecker.
Thanks for doing this work. Although I think I'm going to sort of echo that I think it's maybe too much optimization for a problem which is not optimized well. I mean, I think taking a step back, we got into this hole because, you know, we like regularly meet like in person, and then every time we kept hoping we'd be able to meet, like, you know, we'd be able to meet in person, and so like that, and then we're like on a, you know, not like super short notice, depending, but like a relatively short notice, be like, well, let us take like the arrangements we previously made and try to hoist them on one. And I live in hope that we will not have to do that for that much longer. And certainly, you know, we still have a bit of a run out of you know, meeting locations, or at least nominal meeting locations. So you know, I guess you know, I would probably suggest a somewhat different way to think about this, which is you know, that for the, like, you know, next, so we have till, I guess, March of 20, well, we have till July of 2022 before we like really run out of meeting locations that we like allegedly, you know, made plans for, right? So I would actually suggest that we do none of that stuff and just be like, follow more or less the plan we're following now for those locations, even though it is a terrible plan, as you can see. You know, because those locations are some attempt to optimize for time zones and locations for people who are convenient. And so like they already take into account largely whatever equities we thought were appropriate, like in terms of like fairness, though extremely imperfectly. And that past, you know, and if we think that, like, you know, we're starting to get into a location where we like don't have, you know, don't even have like locations, and I guess I would defer to Jay and others to tell me like whether we're close to having like a location for 115 and 116, you know, then we should rethink the entire thing, because like frankly, like this, like we're gonna meet for like 6 hours a day for 5 hours for 5 days at the pits, you know, I think, you know, like it's like there's like a lot of very attractive reasons to try to compress that into a week when you're all meeting in person, but like those reasons really fall apart when you're like remote. And you know, I have like I think out of the slots I've attended this week, I think you know, all but 2 were double booked. And so that's like terrible, but it's like, and it's only a requirement basically because like we're trying to compress everything where we can only be 40 in place for a week. And so like if we're like seriously considering the possibility that like we're just never meeting in person again, then like we should rework the whole thing and not just try to like take everything we do in person and place it online. So that my put is like, let's consider the next what, you know, 3 of these on the current emergency basis, maybe some tweaks back and forth. And then if we think that the things are gonna extend past July 22, like form a new plan.
Thanks, Ecker. So actually, you raised a number of interesting points that I think I should address. Number one, I mean, I would say that we didn't just immediately jump to the 1 week format for these online meetings. We did try something quite different in 107 with like very few meetings an IETF week and the long tail of interims. I don't have the time to get into my personal issues with that format, and I don't want to suggest that we've exhausted all other possibilities because we haven't. But the draft does actually, one of the sections is very specific and saying, you know, please do conduct experiments. But this is something that we found was like not that bad what we did. Furthermore, I mean, really all the work at Shmoo is not about COVID-19. It is about kind of future cases where we might do an all online meeting or be forced to cancel something. And so, I mean, I'll leave it. It is by no means clear that any of the stuff in this draft will have any impact at all on what happens for the tail end of this COVID-19 disruption. And then the last.
But I guess what I would say is repetitions of this current thing will have the same property. I mean, if the extent to which what we're doing is, you know, 2 months out of a meeting, we said this meeting is 2 years out. And so the idea, like we're scheduling 3 months out and we're going to say, well, all of you people had to suffer with your crappy time zones, like for the past 4 meetings. And now finally we're meeting in your time zone, but we had to cancel it. And so now we're going to run some sort of like fairness algorithm and you just get screwed again. That's like unreasonable, right? Yeah. And so like, if we're going to do mixed meetings like that with short notice cancellation, then the anchor is where it was supposed to be, just like it's been.
So I am personally sympathetic to the idea that we should probably play out the COVID-19 thing under the current scheme, but others might feel differently, and I think that's maybe orthogonal to the ultimate fate of this draft. And the last thing I'd say is, I mean, like you mentioned that you were double booked. I'm double booked in certain slots, but I would say that you and I are edge cases, and the vast majority of the crowd.
I bet of the people who just spoke and the people in this queue, every single one is routinely double booked.
Yeah,
I know
I'd
Mark
say
is,
they're all edge cases.
I bet Ted is.
But yeah,
okay, but
enough.
like when we pick working group slots, we routinely ask who are the people who are critical to be in that working group, and like and so like that we already attempt to optimize for those edge cases, and this has had a majorly negative impact on our ability to do that.
Fair enough. Okay. So again, that's a +1 for debating the length of the meeting. Okay, thank you, Colin.
Thanks. I'm cutting off the mic line at Jay. Thank you.
Hey, does Charles just want to go ahead of me, and then I'll jump in after him?
Sure, I'd like to give it a try. Am I doing better this time? Cool. So first, I guess a couple things. One, the rotate the pane. I think what you're doing here, what you're proposing, maps relatively close to what we do with moving the meetings around. So to me, I think that's okay, and it's certainly not optimal, but by design, the moving around to different parts of the world, it's a attempt, I feel, to be more fair, not to like really optimize. The second thing is you showed 2 different ways of scoring, and the second one that you have up now of minimizing the pain for like your second best, second worst. I think that's a good way to go. That, hey, okay, so you're going to have one meeting that's just horrible. Let's try to make the other 2 not too bad. And I think what you're showing right now does a pretty good job of that. So I'm pretty happy with that. The other thing was in terms of so many people have complained about that we start at what is noon in the local time zone. And I think that's a pretty easy one to address, that you just kind of, once a meeting goes to online, you divorce it. This is kind of the opposite, I think, of what Ecker was suggesting, but I actually don't think the end result is that different. You go with the times that you have here. You don't, the agenda and that, we don't say, hey, it's in San Francisco, so therefore we start at noon San Francisco. You start at whatever your slot is, and it gets people away from that, starting at noon is weird, which I think a lot of people just had objections with. So, I think that would go a long way towards helping things too.
Thank you, Charles. Yeah, I'll note there's some odd effects in here, like the North America slot, like in Eastern time zone, you're running until midnight in the summer, which is a little unintuitive, but that's kind of how the numbers worked out. Colin.
Yeah, wait, just a couple of follow-up things that, so one on that, I mean, we do have, East Coast, West Coast in the US, so the time moves around some anyways. And the other thing is, in terms of just a quick thought on totally rethinking things. Certainly for the hackathon, I think it worked out well to where instead of trying to have it be the weekend before, that was just totally unworkable. I don't think we have a great solution now running the whole week before, and there's obviously some downsides to that. But certainly, if something needs to be online only for an extended period of time, I think a pretty big rethink of how we structure things might work better, including smaller blocks of time over many days instead of more intense like we typically do when we meet face to face. That seems to have worked for the hackathon, or at least it's not as bad as trying to meet on the weekend virtually, which was horrible. So I think that might be worth exploring a little bit. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Colin.
So first of all, can you hear me? Is that working? Okay, so I want to just sort of so first of all, I like I think the most important thing is to discuss what we're trying to optimize here. So I think that I like the point of like, let's make it so people only have one meeting a year that's really bad for them. And I think that we can try and do that from every time zone. I've played with these same pane systems before a little bit, and I do think that probably the blurring the North America, Asia into one time point probably impacts your results here and is going to get slightly things wrong. But I'm suggesting something else beyond that, which is we do that that's the highest priority, is only one meeting a year that's really bad for anyone in any time zone, basically. In any time zone where we have like a non-trivial number of people, anything, right? But then we do a secondary, so that's the first level, but secondarily we optimize inside that slightly differently. And we are trying to get work done here. And we are trying to have people interact with us that are not like so blurry they can't even think straight and it's 3 a.m. for them as much as we can. So inside the time range that we have that is workable to have somebody not have a totally awful meeting, I think that we should actually optimize to minimize the average pain across the participants that come. And have the participants that come identify the time zone that's painful for them, because as many people have raised, it's some people it's early, some people it's late. And we can just say, pick a 5-hour block of the day that is painful for you. And so primarily, no one has more than one bad meeting a year, but secondarily, we try and do optimize it. Now, this is going to obviously shift things towards that slightly optimized for North America, Europe sort of shift. I mean, I understand completely the problem that this leads to, but I think that that's probably a reasonable trade-off to say you're going to have one meeting, but we're not just going to torture everyone on an issue of pure fairness, because we are trying to actually effectively achieve some work, and we're going to weight that by people doing work. I think that would be an interesting trade-off and might result in things where we don't just have a time that is clearly worse for 95% of our participants, then we could have shifted it and still not changed the big effect of bad for everyone. So anyway, let me just leave it at that. I think we should pursue some metric that sort of balances those, getting work done and being inclusive.
Thank you, Colin. Andrew.
Yeah, hi. Well, first, I agree with what Eka said earlier, that in the short term, simply going with the geographic, sort of the notional geographic locations of the physical scheduling is as good a route as any. But notwithstanding that, if this carries on for longer, I think if we accept that whatever is done is going to be bad for some people, then I have to say this seems to me to be, if you like, the least worst solution. A bit like with democracy. We've tried a bunch of other stuff. This is definitely the least worst. So as long as you accept that you can't optimize for me personally all of the time, because otherwise there'd be an awful lot of other people that'd be pretty unhappy, then I think an algorithm which basically means you have one bad meeting, which for me happens to be this one, and two which is sort of okay, is reasonable. And there will always be outliers, and life's tough, get over it. It would be my view on that. So I think it's a good job, and the sooner we get back to in-person meetings and this becomes less important, the better.
Thank you. Bron?
That it's great to optimize for an ideal perfect set of people who might come here, but the people who are here are the ones that are getting the work done. We do have to make, I'm here in Australia where I'm going to suffer the worst for saying this, but I think it is important we're here to get work done. We're not here to create equal magic for the entire world who might theoretically show up. So it's important to set things that actually do let people get the work done. There's no happy medium between 1 week where people are fully focused or spread out so that it's ideal for everyone who wants to fit in a meeting around their times. I think interims are good for the spread out things. If we're going to have IETFs at all, I think smearing them across a much wider time is going to be less effective than having a week in which you get the work done. I've seen a lot of people in the working groups I'm in are doing a lot of work this week because they're 100% focused on the IETF. If they're trying to fit just the meetings themselves around the rest of their life, they'll get to the meeting And that's part of what we're getting out of these things anyway. We're getting these sessions and the sessions work fine, but we're not getting the interaction that happens outside the sessions as much. And spreading it over time, it makes it even less likely that you'll get any interaction outside the sessions. People will show up just for the sessions and that's it. So I would push against the idea of spreading it out over too much time. We can do that with interims, but if we're going to have an IETF at all, it should be a block of dedicated time so that you get the interactions that are outside just the session themselves.
Thank you, Bron. Jay? Or are you just in line to present?
To present, I'm also in line quickly to briefly talk about this one. And then I will present. So first things, the numbers of participants that we currently have show that we're not putting people off by the current plan. We might be upsetting people, we might be storing up a bunch of people being upset by it, but it's not a disaster anyway, because we've got 1,200 people for this meeting, for example, which is, as we know, horrible for people in Europe. I'm interested to know whether anybody has changed their minds on the 1 to 2 week thing, because we've got a number of people promoting longer than 1 week, but unless we've had people from experience change their minds on that and say, right, we can go to 2 weeks for these reasons, then I'm not sure that we're going to get any different answer from the way we did last time. Next thing is Echo was talking about conflicts, and it wasn't clear to me whether that was conflicts with outside work or conflicts with sorry, get the cat down, with conflicts within the IETF meeting week. Within the IETF meeting week, we do need to get better at managing conflicts. We do the survey after each meeting, and people regularly tell us there are issues with conflicts, and we're not seeing much improvement on our handling of conflict. So we need to be doing a bit more about that. And if it's about people's external conflicts, then in the end, being as blunt as possible, that's other people's planning failures, and those are things that we're not responsible for. So I don't think we do anything about that. And then finally, just to note that someone talked about golden slots, and that as in that within those, the rotation times, there are shorter periods within the 6 hours that are easier for everybody, perhaps, or could be easier for everybody. I'm not entirely sure. And could we optimize so that we have the higher volume things within those? Somebody said, such as BOFs and the plenary, and that seems to be quite a sensible idea. So that's just my bits to finish off with.
Thanks, Jay. So I just had, there was actually another slide in presentation. You don't need to put it up, Suresh. The other thing in the draft is a little algorithm to that basically the end goal of it is to say is if the meeting hasn't been in your time zone for a while, like put it in that time zone, because there are the 3 slots to use. Right. There's that. We're not going to go through it. That's not worth doing in the meeting, but please have a look at it. Make sure it makes sense, that I didn't screw it up somehow. And I'd welcome your comments on that. Suresh, how do you want to handle these people who have added themselves to the queue after you cut it? Do we want to have some responses?
Yeah, I asked Karan and Mark to make brief statements and then move on. I think it's important that we hear them and then give some time to Jay after.
Okay.
Yes.
Thanks, everyone.
The first thing is, I was talking about conflicts between working groups. I think this is an impossible problem that's constrained by the schedule, and but having 3 slots instead of 4 makes it even harder. But so the second point is, I think that a lot of these bad things, like the scheduling problems and the time zone problems, are acceptable in terms of being willing to, when you're getting face-to-face interaction, because I think it's very high value. But when it's a screen like this, I think it's much lower value. So I think it's worth revisiting the balance of value.
So, sorry, Akhtar, would you be able to speak slightly slower, because I'm finding it a bit difficult to follow through all the
Sure. Sure.
Thank you.
Yes. So I guess what I was saying was that a lot of these things that we're complaining about, namely the scheduling hangups, the time zones, and whatever, are good trade-offs when we are getting the value of meeting face-to-face. But when we're not meeting face-to-face, then we have to reconsider whether those things are better than other things. And finally, to this question of, have I changed my mind? Yeah, I think I was like more in favor of like the 1 week thing initially. But I think like, having done it a couple of times, I think that now we're kind of like it's pretty clear it doesn't work super well, and we need to find some other strategy if we're going to do it a lot.
Now I do the dance. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, we can, Mark. Go ahead.
Okay. So yeah, I agree with Ecker, and I would really like to see a serious effort put into considering either not holding an IETF week or having a severely truncated one. I think that Ecker's exactly right. The trade-offs aren't good here, and I would like the outcome of that discussion to be judged not on how many people complain, because it's very clear that we're always going to have people complaining for something or else, but rather on the strength of the arguments, because I thought that's how we made decisions in the IETF. So can we please get that on the discussion list?
Yep, sounds good. Thanks, Mark. Noted. Thanks. Thank you. And Jay, so Jay is presenting the results of the IETF 112 survey. So there's an interactive dashboard, and then there's like a URL in the agenda as well as in the mailing list. So feel free to like peruse it at your own convenience if you run out of time.
So, Suresh, sorry, but can I ask, as an author of this draft, I'm not sure what to do here. I guess there's no point about asking about adoption of the draft, but I'm not even sure if people want to keep working on this at all. So
I think the right thing to do would be call for adoption and see how things turn out, right? Like, if people say, hey, this is like a terrible idea, like, let's not do this, then we drop it, right? Like, there's like no other way for us to judge if there's interest in doing a like solution on this. So
what I heard was, at least to people who said something, some support for the second system. So I think we probably just tweak those times a little bit and put that in there. And then we start a thread on 1 week versus 2 weeks and see where that takes us.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think like there's like actionable comments.
And maybe adopt. Yeah.
Yeah, but so, I mean, sure, we could ask, this is a concrete question to ask 1 week versus 2 weeks, but that was not really what I heard. Like people said, like they want to spread it out even more. They think it's just silly to keep everything within 1 week, right? That's a very different approach. And like if people want to organize a meeting entirely different than we're organizing the honor meetings right now, then this document might not be very valuable as it is, because that's documenting what we have done so far.
Right. Like I think like Mirya, like there's two things we can do, right? Like one of them is kind of put out like a survey monkey. It's not like binding, right? But at least like, but it's like, I don't want to go into this voting kind of thing, right? But at least to see like, where people lie on and go with the adoption. But I think Mark's point of like minimizing the complainers is not the, and Ecker's point as well, right? It's not about how few people complain, right? But I really think like, going for adoption and kind of doing like a parallel kind of survey, just with very, very simple questions might be okay. Like we're not like good survey designers, but I think this one is like pretty clear. At least we can hear back, let's say in Jay's next survey, like, if people would like to see this over multiple weeks as an option.
So Jay just posted a survey link, but I'm not sure which survey it is.
This is the one about 112, IETF 112.
The one I'm about to talk about, yeah.
I see. Okay. Yeah, then we catch up again. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Mirya.
Suresh, can you allow the screen sharing again? Thank you.
Yeah, done. Yeah.
Great. Sorry, user error, and I managed to kill my Meet Echo session by something stupid, right? Okay, so there's an interactive dashboard of the survey that we've done about IETF 112. The survey's still open, so you can still do this. I'm presenting it here because I'd really like to know your views on it, how much we can use it, how much we can't, what it means. The reason for us doing the survey is because there's a distinct possibility that the assessment may say, yes, you can go ahead with Madrid, but then we then get down to the question about the numbers of the number of people that will attend, and it's getting complex when we're looking at the various different requirements that may or may not be in place for people at that time. So what I really want to do is just explain the survey that we have, and then ask you for anyone to give their views on what the survey is, so that we can go forward with that. And it'd be useful if those of you who've got your hands up still could clear those, unless you actually want to have your hands up again in future. Thank you. So first of all, we have the list of people by country. I don't think there's anything particular here. We could look at the number of regions, except
Test.
Whoever said test.
Still here.
So it's just Jay, or do we lose the chairs as well?
No, I'm still here. I think Jay, I can use it.
I have multiple monitors, and switching between those does not work. Right, okay. So I won't bother putting the dashboard up again, as we only have a couple of minutes left. But if I would like some help, please, in trying to interpret this survey. The big questions are, is it representative? And if it is representative, of how many people is it representative? You know, can we scale up the results in any way to anything meaningful from this survey? And does it help us understand how many people may turn up? Then we have a question near the end, which is about the number of people that people believe is the minimum number that you need at in-person to make a viable in-person meeting, where the median result is round about 500 there, it looks like. And very interested in people's views around that. Does that matter? Is there an actual limit there around that? And then the third question is about the people who say they will be coming in terms of their role, working group chairs, ADs, and other things. How much does that matter? So I'm very interested in just trying to understand this survey. So, sorry, are people still in the queue? Do you want to go through those? Or shall I do that? Okay, I'll go for that, Bron.
Yeah.
Mark, then.
Just a comment, Jay, I had a little trouble parsing what the survey meant by acceptable, and I almost sent you a mail about it, but I don't think I did in the end. It's not clear to me if this means, you know, does it make it more possible for me to go to the meeting, or that if I say it's not acceptable, then I wouldn't go to that. I just didn't know how those questions were couched, and that makes it hard for me to interpret the survey.
Right, sorry. So as with any survey, this goes through approximately 20 people before it gets published, but we always have an interpretation question afterwards around this. So yes, that was the intent around it. Okay, anything else, Mark? No. Okay, Andrew?
What was the intent, Jay?
Okay, yeah, thanks.
I think Mark's trying to come back in, Jay.
Sorry, yeah, you said that was the intent, but I said several things, so I didn't know which one.
Oh, sorry. I thought I only had to think about the intent about acceptable or not acceptable, and yes, that was the intent. Is that you say whether you would that's acceptable for you to attend, and therefore, you know, that as in, if it's unacceptable, then that means you wouldn't be attending because you find those restrictions unacceptable.
Question. Okay, thank you.
On the survey, Jay, the thing which it didn't ask, at least I don't think it did, and if it did, apologies. There wasn't anything in there that I can remember when I did it a few weeks ago about insistence on vaccination, because to me those various permutations of sort of different options none of them were relevant if I wouldn't have confidence that the other people in the room had all been vaccinated. So I would absolutely go to the meeting if everyone else that was there was vaccinated. Would be highly unlikely to go if they weren't, and that's irrespective of masks, social distancing, etc.
Okay,
so
thanks. So,
me.
right, okay, so that was implicitly asked, but not directly asked via the question about no restrictions. Would you find no restrictions acceptable? And with the view being that if you thought that you wanted everybody to be vaccinated, that no restrictions was therefore unacceptable. But it wasn't explicitly asked. The guidelines that we're consulting on are that states that we would only do what we are required to do by law or by local regulation, that we're not going to impose anything additional on top of that, which is why we haven't included the possibility of us insisting on vaccinations. And I would like some feedback on people through the consultation process, or now, as to whether or not that is something that we should have done, that we should have considered insisting that people are vaccinated as one option. Okay. Right.
I just want to mention that we are out of time, but I think as long as people stick around and the meet echo doesn't kick us out, we can continue meeting. So thank you.
Yeah. Mark and Andrew, I'm going to assume you're done, even if you're still in the queue, and move on then to Elliot.
Good morning, Jay. Good afternoon and good evening to others. This morning, well, yeah, maybe it's afternoon anyway. I just had one or two questions, Jay, in terms of the usage of the survey results. Are you doing this for venue sizing, amongst other reasons? And the reason I ask is the IETF, given when it's at 1,000 people, the venue selections are actually quite tight in terms of where we can go. And if the number drops, we actually open up alternative venues. And I'm curious if you're using it in that way.
No, so we're only using this IETF 112, and IETF 112 is, well, venue sizing is problematic generally. So the agreement we have with the venue at IETF 112 is that we can scale downwards without being adversely financially impacted by any of the minimums that we normally have in place. But the problem is that the lower that we scale, the more they want their space back so that they can resell it and use it for other clients. But we then run into the problem that we have a scaling problem caused by the parallel streams. If there are 10 rooms, then we can't necessarily give up any of the rooms, even if we've only got 2 or 3 people per room, because they don't subdivide, the rooms can't be subdivided in the future. So the answer to your question is no, but it is a complex issue for us, that venue sizing. Okay, Richard.
So I hope you can hear me now. I just wanted to make a comment on your earlier comment around what the government restrictions are. So quite frankly, you can always be more strict than what the government rules are. And as the host, it is up to you to basically be more restrictive in what you allow in. So long story short, you can actually require people to show up not only with what the government sanctions is, like PCR tests or normal tests and vaccinated, but you can basically ask them to be vaccinated and PCR tested, or perhaps provide some testing equipment on site. I don't think that this is a legal problem at all. The more from the transmission point of view, from the virus, you can only impose this on the IETF participants, but you cannot impose this on any of the other participants or any of the other guests of the hotel, which can just stumble by, and there you have the risk of people not being imposed on all of this. So that's basically just what I wanted to say.
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, no, I mean, I don't think we have a legal problem about imposing it. It's more the cultural issue of and the setting the precedent here. Should the IETF be doing, setting a health requirement for people or a vaccination requirement for people to turn up separately from what we're legally obliged to do? To me, that seemed like quite a major step forward in just the responsibility we're taking and the liability we're taking and what we're expecting and telling participants they're allowed to do, and that seemed problematic. Okay, Charles?
Yeah, just one thought on what it's okay to require. I mean, I think one of the tricky things here is that requirements, what governments say, it's changing, right? So even if you say, well, we're not going to require vaccination, it could be that by the time the meeting comes around, that's required, say, in restaurants or whatever in Madrid. So I mean, I think some of these things are a little bit out of your hands, and you can always be more strict. And I think in some ways, I feel like being more strict would be a good thing than what the regulations are, because that way you at least let people know in advance, hey, we're going to be imposing these things. And that way things don't change and get worse. And now, their decision of whether they wanted to go or not go changes. So if you tell them what the rules are and you make them pretty strict such that that they're not really going to get worse or stricter, I think that would be helpful. The other thing is in terms of number of people who will attend. And I think if you make the rules known, you'll get a much more accurate sense of the number of people. And I think the number of people that you need to have a useful meeting might be a little bit lower than what you were thinking, because of first of all, the willingness of people to attend, the willingness of people to go through pain. I think that increases as how invested they are in the meeting increases. So if there's a meeting where I really want to get work done and I'm presenting things, I'm very involved, I'm willing to get up in the middle of the night, right? But if it was a conference that I'm just attending because it's free and I might learn something cool, I'm not going to get up in the middle of the night for it. So I think the same thing with who's going to go through the pain to travel, who's going to go through, so I think it's fewer people then it's not a really high number of people that you need, because the number of people who really are doing, say the 80, what's that 20-80 rule, like 20% of the people might be doing 80% of the work. So I think that's where you should aim. It should be a lower number than 500, certainly.
Yeah, thanks. Tolis, go ahead.
And maybe going back to what the participant before Charles, said. So one of the things that we do have in many of the IETF in the past, we had the expectation that you were registered and that your badge was there so you could enter the rooms. We've gotten very lax on that, which is nice, but if it's maybe just about you register, if you show you're vaccinated, you get your vaccination dot, and basically it's just self-declaration, right? That would be, for example, if there really is a mixture of vaccinated and unvaccinated, just self-declaration. You get the appropriate dot so people can make up their mind themselves, right? I mean, it can, just as an example, right? It can come at any level of what is the requirement, right? Or what are the options that IETF is offering, right? There is this seat spacing, right? Will there be seat spacing wide enough that you're not worried? How large are the rooms, right? So I think it's very hard to make judgments up front, which I think bring me to the point I wanted to make, which is that if we have the feeling that there is a chance to do something for 112, which is different from here, maybe have an interim or so and discuss about that, whatever form it is, if it's official Shmoo or whoever organizes it, to have more timely discussion on that, which might be in a month or so if something is still to be decided. Thanks.
Sounds good. Thanks, Tolis, and please feel free to respond on the list to Jay's thread as well. Like, he posted these results there, so if you can respond on it, and if needed, we can certainly request an interim. So thank you very much. Sorry all for making you stay longer. So especially the people in Europe, like, will have like terrible time for this meeting, and I hope to see you in the plenary. Thank you. Thanks all. And thanks, Braun, for the minutes. Thank you.